Hello there. Today I'll be exploring the question, is prosopagnosia hereditary? So this is my poster. As you can see, I've broken down my question into several subtopics, which are denoted by the separate text boxes on my poster. The first topic I'll explore is what is prosopagnosia, where I'll discuss the two different types of this condition and how they occur. The second topic is case studies of hereditary prosopagnosia, where I'll discuss families who have multiple members with this condition. My next topic is brain regions involved in facial recognition, where I'll label the exact brain parts active when we look at a person's face. The next topic is living with prosopagnosia, where I'll discuss coping strategies employed by those who have this condition. My fifth and final topic is, can prosopagnosia be passed on, where I'll discuss whether this condition has been found to be hereditary or not based on research. So let's start first with what prosopagnosia is. According to Ovidian and Berman, 2014, prosopagnosia is a condition where an individual is unable to recognize faces despite having normal levels of vision and intelligence. People with prosopagnosia are able to register that they are looking at a face, but are unable to distinguish someone's facial features from another person's, and do not associate that with a person that they know. There are two different types of prosopagnosia. The first of which is congenital prosopagnosia, and the second is acquired prosopagnosia. There are several differences between the two, and the major ones have been outlined in the following table which I have created. Congenital prosopagnosia is present from birth and is a lifelong condition that the individual has to adapt and deal with. Acquired prosopagnosia developed after brain damage occurs and is therefore not as common as the congenital type. In fact, acquired prosopagnosia is very rare, whereas the congenital type affects around 2.5% of the population. To put this in perspective, this makes congenital as prevalent as dyslexia, which affects the same percentage of people. Many people with prosopagnosia are not aware that they have it, particularly those that are born with a congenital type, as they've been dealing with and adapting to their condition since birth. The biological basis of congenital prosopagnosia are still being explored, and as of yet there is no identified gene or chemical reaction found to be responsible for this type of prosopagnosia. In contrast, acquired prosopagnosia occurs when there is brain damage to the temporal or occipital lobes near the fusiform face area. This damage can occur from a stroke or brain trauma. When we're talking about hereditary prosopagnosia, we are referring to the congenital type. As acquired prosopagnosia occurs after brain damage, this cannot be hereditary. The best way to determine whether prosopagnosia runs in families or not is to look at families who have several members with this condition. The first study looked at concerned a family of 13, where 10 were diagnosed with congenital prosopagnosia. You can see from this family tree, the majority of those affected were siblings in the third generation. The two squares coloured grey were family members suspected to have prosopagnosia, but this was unconfirmed as they were unable to be tested. Only one family member was unaffected by this condition, and that was the grandmother. This family is very fascinating in that one of the members reported that at family gatherings, everyone had to wear name tags in order to recognize each other. All of the family members affected were tested on a range of cognition tests, and they all performed at or above average. However, when they were tested on facial recognition, the family members on average got 38 out of 72 correct, while the control group got 60 out of 72 right. Only two people in the control group scored below 52, showing that the family's recognition was well below average. After other tests were conducted, the researchers concluded that this family's facial recognition deficits resulted from the ventral visual areas and not brain areas associated with emotional recognition. This suggests that facial identification and recognizing facial emotions are not processed by the same parts of the brain. Another family that has several members affected by prosopagnosia is shown here, and there's their family tree which I've created. So for this family of 6, which 2 parents and 4 siblings, 2 of the daughters and the father were found to have congenital prosopagnosia. They performed significantly lower than the control group on facial recognition tests. Interestingly enough, the son also thought himself to be prosopagnosic, but after testing, it was found that his facial recognition skills were average. Therefore, the mother and son did not have this condition. None of the family members had a history of head injuries or brain trauma, and like the previous family, prosopagnosia was present in more than one generation, suggesting a genetic or hereditary basis. The previous 2 studies involved Western families in Western countries, so this pops up the question of whether prosopagnosia is culturally biased. Connect, etc. 2007 tested for prosopagnosic in India and compared the results to German families. They conducted their study in a university and found one female Indian student with congenital prosopagnosia. The researchers questioned her about her family and found that the condition was prevalent in other family members as well. As you can see from the family tree here, the condition was spread out over 3 generations, just as it was for one of the previous families mentioned. This further shows that prosopagnosia is likely to be hereditary. This study speculated that the hereditary component of this condition was a result of an autosomal dominant gene. We now know what prosopagnosia is and have seen that it can run in families across the world. We shall now look at the brain regions that underpin the facial recognition process. So the process of facial recognition can be broken down into 2 phases, the detection phase and the analysis phase. The detection phase is when the brain registers that there is a face present and all of the facial features are viewed. Basically, the person is aware of a person's face, but has not made any connections from the facial features to the person that it represents. The second phase, the analysis phase, is when the brain processes other information about the face, such as a person's emotional expression, their eye gaze direction, and their gender, age, and health status. For those unaffected by prosopagnosia, this would be the stage where we would recognize the face and consolidate any other information about that person, such as where we knew them from and the relationship we had with them. For the first phase of detection, the brain areas active are the fusiform gyrus, the posterior temporal sulcus, and the inferior occipital gyrus. The fusiform gyrus is the most important brain area for this process, particularly in the right hemisphere. This picture shows both fusiform gyruses when the person was looking at a picture of faces. As we can see, the right side is more active than the left, showing that the right hemisphere is predominant for facial recognition. Therefore, for people with acquired prosopagnosia, which occurs after brain damage, damage to the right hemisphere fusiform gyrus definitely results in acquired prosopagnosia. The 2 major brain areas involved in the second phase of face detection is the amygdala and the hippocampus. As we know, the second phase involves our brain connecting up the face with what knowledge we have about that person. All of that knowledge and memory is stored in the hippocampus, hence why this brain region is involved in this phase. The amygdala is the center for our emotions, and this part of the brain is used when we recognize and interpret facial emotions. The facial recognition process described is what happens when a person without prosopagnosia sees a face. So what happens in the brain of someone with prosopagnosia? Is the process the same? In the case of acquired prosopagnosia, which occurs after a brain injury, the damage is to one of the areas of the brain involved in the facial recognition process. Because of this damage, the person is no longer able to recognize faces. However, for those with congenital prosopagnosia, it appears that they simply fail to develop normal face processing abilities. Research is still being done in this area, as to what is different for congenital prosopagnosics is not fully understood. Learning to live with prosopagnosia can be a difficult thing, but the coping strategies employed by prosopagnosics are both fascinating and novel. Many people with prosopagnosia that were interviewed listed remembering certain things about people as a way to identify them. The most common things that prosopagnosics remembered about someone was their clothing, hair color, voice pitch and tone, and their walking gait. The human brain is actually very attuned to picking up the person's style of walking, and this is often a subconscious method of recognizing or identifying someone. Prosopagnosics said they had problems identifying people when they changed hairstyles or had tattoos or piercings done. Many also said they preferred to read a book over watching a movie, as it was hard to keep track of which character was which when they changed clothing and hairstyles on a regular basis. For those born with congenital prosopagnosia, all of these coping strategies were often deployed without conscious thought. Most people with prosopagnosia also reported avoiding social events and having problems with relationships due to their condition. So this brings us back to the question of whether prosopagnosia can be passed on. After all of this research, can prosopagnosia actually be considered hereditary? Connecticut 2006 speculated that there may be an autosomal dominant gene that leads to prosopagnosia, but this has never been confirmed. In fact, there has been no gene identified as responsible for this condition, but it's highly speculated that congenital prosopagnosia is hereditary. This is due to the high prevalence of prosopagnosics in families and the fact that in almost all cases, the prosopagnosia spans across multiple generations. Research is still being conducted into this area of congenital prosopagnosia. As for acquired prosopagnosia, this occurs as a result of brain injury or trauma and is therefore not hereditary. Here is a list of the references used in the presentation, and thank you very much for watching.